Design a lot better than Zoom. This is great.
Yeah. Okay. We are live.
Good evening. Welcome to a American Federation of Teachers Town Hall on the reopening of schools. This event is sponsored by the CyFair chapter and the Lone Star College chapter of AFT. My name is Bryan J. Henry. I'm a Democratic candidate for the Texas State House in District 130 here in Northwest Harris County. And we have a wonderful panel this evening of union members and educators who are going to speak on the timeliest issue right now for most families, which is the reopening of schools. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Nikki.
Hi, everybody. Nikki Coward. I'm the proud president of CyFair AFT, the American Federation of Teachers chapter here in CyFair ISD.
Thank you for being here, Nikki. Mariah?
Hi, y'all. My name is Mariah Najmuddin. I am a resident and taxpayer in District 130, but I'm also a teacher in CFISD.
Leslie?
Hi, everybody. I am also a taxpayer and resident in District 130. I am a CFISD educator, and my kids are CFISD students, so I'm also a parent in the district.
And Richard?
Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Shaw, and I'm representing AFT Lone Star College tonight. I've been doing some consulting work for them, and I've been involved in the AFT union movement since the early 1970s.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here to discuss this important topic. We're going to begin with Nikki. And can you just give us an update on the status of the lawsuit in CyFair ISD and what we should expect in the future?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Brian. So our local had decided to file the injunction back on Friday, August 14th. We filed the actual day that PD began after our local had been flooded with, quite frankly, both members and non-members sharing professional development calendars and schedules. There were some campuses that seemed to be doing all the things right with social distancing, whereas others, had things listed off as scavenger hunts. Again, there were just some red flags, and the membership and leadership of our local voted in favor of at least handing it off to our legal team. The legal team thought that we had pretty compelling evidence that it went against, the health orders for the county. We had no idea which judge it would land on their desk. And, of course, Harris County courthouse is all doing their work virtual. So that Friday evening, it was a emergency type situation, of course, the temporary restraining order. It was granted approximately 7 p.m. that evening. It was a very long, exhausting and emotional day, emotional week. I feel like we haven't really slowed down since then. We were not naive in the fact that once everything went to the Supreme Court level, that I keep saying there's some powerful political allies, if you will, on the other side. So it didn't make sense at that point, looking at calendar dates, knowing that this would only address the 3 weeks in CyFair for the professional development. Again, I keep saying, to everyone that has asked for an update, this had absolutely no bearing on students. We weren't talking about September and what that looked like. We were strictly asking for the option for professionals, our teachers, to have the option rather to do virtual PD. So we quickly realized, in looking at calendar dates, that this could get dragged out in court for way too long, and we decided to shift our advocacy efforts to what September and safe reopening should and could look like.
Well, thank you very much for your advocacy representing the employees of CyFair ISD. I know there was sort of a lot of confusion at the time. People didn't even necessarily understand what the demand was in the lawsuit, and it was just about choice. It was about educators having the option to do remote PD, and it turned into this, emotional reaction to attacking the district and this or that. And it really, for me, it really became, a microcosm of what we're seeing in larger political debates where people just polarized. You saw people seeing for the first time how important a union is, how important it is to have a collective voice. And at the same time, you had people reacting negatively. And hopefully we can heal after this, and people who work together don't have any, long-term bitterness about how the school year started. Maybe Leslie or Mariah could talk to that. I mean, are people even talking about the lawsuit anymore? Have we kind of moved past that and just kind of preparing for the school year to start?
I can take that question. We haven't really had those conversations anymore. People aren't talking about the lawsuit. They're not talking about the what ifs. They're not voicing any of this polarization. But there is a sense of collective bargaining together, or a collective of teachers who understand that they're not alone in their fears. They're not alone in all of the anxiety of school reopening. And I think those conversations are still happening, and they're very important. I think it'll really lay the groundwork of what teachers are going to do in these next few weeks, because people are scared still, and they are going to lean on AFT and other organizations in order to feel like their voice is being heard.
Sure. Leslie, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. I think we're professionals, so we are doing our best to put one foot in front of the other and prepare as best we can to welcome our students and to work together. I think that, the hashtag that was going around that weekend after the lawsuit was really hurtful to a lot of folks who really care deeply about this district, about their colleagues, about their students, and also appreciate the advocacy of AFT. I think both things can be true at the same time, and I really don't want that to get lost in the conversation. And I think really those of us who are concerned about the safety of our students and our community and our colleagues are really focused now, like Nikki was saying, on opening safely, on needing clarity around policies and procedures. And I'm really thinking a lot about the working conditions of our teachers and staff, not only in terms of safety, but just in terms of sustainability as well. There's just a lot of stress.
Right. So I'm curious, at this point, having gone through a couple of weeks of professional development, what are the concerns that you as educators or that your colleagues have at this point about in-person instruction, and what would make you feel better about in-person instruction starting next week?
So I think one of the biggest concerns that we've noticed is that there's a lot of inconsistencies from campus to campus. And so even, I love my school and I love our admin, but even at our campus, we still haven't received our plexiglass. And, that was a promise that the district made to parents, that every child would have a plexiglass, every teacher would have a plexiglass. And I already know that they're on back order for a lot of schools, or, we're going to get a set amount, but that might not be enough for every child. And so that, that also brings up questions of equity in the classroom. How are we deciding which child gets a plexiglass and which child, well, you're out of luck, we don't have enough. And so that's, that is something that I worry about a lot is, I can do as much as I can to keep myself safe, but how am I going to keep all of the children in my classroom safe? And then all of the people that they come into contact, the bus driver, the cafeteria women and men, the custodians. So there's just all of these anxieties of it's a little too late. School starts on Tuesday and we're not ready for the tangible safety precautions that were promised to parents.
Leslie, do you have anything to add, or Nikki?
Leslie, I'll drop out there and say, and I didn't say it in the introduction, but I am also a CyFair parent, a proud CyFair parent. And something that Leslie said that I've said probably in board speeches before is I want to just, loop that back in and agree with you in saying, I think you can both be AFT proud and CyFair ISD proud. I have always felt that way. I'm a product of CyFair, and yeah, all 4 of my boys, 2 have gone on to graduate, but K through 12, all 4 years, and then, or both boys rather, and then my 2 little guys, my 4th and 5th grader. I was sharing with the panel before we jumped on, they had virtual Meet the Teacher this week. And I hope that every parent had the same, will show the grace, first of all, that needs to be shown, but we'll have the same interaction with the educators, the CyFair teachers on their campus. They were very honest in that we're still, figuring some of this out, that some things aren't ready with the programs that we're going to be leaning on. But as a parent, in full disclosure, I announced like mid-summer due to some health concerns with my youngest. He was very asthmatic and had reactive airway disease, RAD. It sounds like a really cool thing, but RAD is not a good thing for his health condition. So yeah, I announced, probably in June, that after prayerfully considering it for my family, that we would definitely stick with remote learning. But yeah, I can't imagine what parents are feeling that don't have that option. It's going to be a struggle, can I say, for my husband and I to switch work hours around. I still work full time and he still works full time. But yeah, I could just tell with the teachers today that we interacted with, and one of them, I won't say the campus or anything, brand new to teaching, brand new to the campus, had no idea who I was. But I think by the end of the conversation, she's like, wow, thank you so much for your support. And I thought, oh, if she only knew, my day job, what I do all day is supporting teachers and parents throughout CyFair. But yeah, I worry about our neighbors and the kids. And because, like Mariah referenced, I think there were some non-negotiable type guarantees that they felt like once they made that choice officially, through the we call it's the Home Access Center, but once they did the survey, I think they were under the impression, at least, maybe not a guarantee, that some of the safety measures would be there way in advance before Tuesday, September the 8th. But I want to remind everybody, my local represents school nurses, paraprofessionals, food service workers, bus drivers, bus attendants. We have CyFair SD police officers. There was a couple of school nurses that have reached out and they said, we don't have an isolation room yet. We don't have a custodian that would even know how to properly sanitize it if we did have a COVID positive case. And we all know, we've seen it on the news. I think there was a kindergartner baby, day one this week, or maybe it was the end of last week, not in CyFair, but it was reported that came back to a neighboring school district and was positive on day one. So I don't know that I could sleep at night if I knew, like, oh, we don't even have an isolation room set up. Different parts of the CyFair ISD safety reopening plan, or LEAD plan as we call it locally, I have said and gone on record, some of the components of it are absolutely brilliant. But the fact that there's not black and white around other components of it, I just keep saying, like, the gray parts there are just, they're vital that we get that worked out before Tuesday. And it's now, almost Friday. So.
Yeah, I was in the classroom when Hurricane Harvey came through and our campus flooded and we were displaced. And the catchphrase that year was flexibility. And it's one thing to be flexible when you're just trying to rearrange how to do instruction. It's a completely different ask to say be flexible during a public health crisis where people's health and well-being are at risk. You really have to have things in order. And I've been surprised to hear that it seems things do differ a lot from campus to campus. And you would think that they would just be lockstep, that it would be universal policies across the district. And I can't speak to the degree to which that's true or not true, but I was seeing things on a Facebook thread about this topic, about whether or not teachers would have discretion to allow masks to be taken off and stuff. And then somebody said that was absolutely false. Masks have to be on all the time. I don't know if Leslie, you can verify that. What are y'all hearing about what discretion teachers have to enforce or maintain certain expectations and protocols?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. You know, the Lead Safely plan and the FAQs on the Lead Safely plan, which you can find on the CFISD website, is sort of my go-to for information about, you know, when the rubber hits the road, what is the minimum expectation? What is truly going to be enforceable? And so I know that the mask protocols, the mask expectations have been tightened up recently. And so, and then on campus, on individual campuses, administrators can choose to make the mask expectations even stricter. And so we have evolved as a district from saying that a face shield alone is sufficient, which is, you know, according to various health organizations, actually insufficient for protecting others and oneself. So we've evolved as a district to the point where I believe we're saying no, masks are required. But you know, I believe maybe in the elementary schools, there's still a degree of flexibility within the classroom when the children are, you know, in the room for instruction. If they can be distanced, it may be up to the teacher's discretion. There's a lot of language in the Lead Safely plan around when feasible. You know, this should happen when feasible. Well, when is it feasible? When isn't it feasible? You know, is my child going into a classroom in a school where the principal and the teachers are insisting that all kids be masked at all times? Or are they in a situation where the teacher or the principal might not be as concerned about that? And that to me is somewhat unclear. Another thing I wonder about is if a campus is choosing to be stricter about mask requirements, if there is a complaint from, say, a parent who's objecting to that level of strictness, will the campus policy be upheld or will it be overturned? Because when you look at the language in the Lead Safely plan, there's perhaps more flexibility than the campus is communicating, if that makes sense. So I believe it was Nikki who mentioned there's just still a lot of gray area. And that is a concern to me as a community member, as a parent, and as an employee.
And yet out in the other world of away from the schools, there's virtually no flexibility. You can't enter a Costco without a mask. You can't enter any other kind of a store without a mask, and there's no flexibility given. And what scares me is the concept of school flexibility, and we've been through this in education for years. You know, how much flexibility does a single principal have versus what are rather strict health protocol guidelines, and it's all about a mask. Masks aren't perfect, but they certainly stop a lot of a disease being spread. If anyone's looked into masks and what gets through those masks, so it's scary. It's very scary. At the Lone Star College level, we're going to be doing a hybrid. We're going to have online teaching, online learning, which at the college level we've had that for a long time. There have been a lot of courses still offered online. We're going to have some in classroom, and Bryan may know particularly about his schedule what that's going to look like. But from what I've been told, we're still going to try to limit the number of people in our buildings and keep it just down to those who are coming to those classes, and those sizes are going to be carefully watched. You can do that at a college level where you don't have regular kids coming and you don't have regular classes going on for 7.5 hours a day. So you guys at your level are in a scary situation.
Yeah, it's been fascinating for me as a professor at Lone Star College who was in the secondary environment just a year ago to see the differences in how this has played out in a high school versus a community college setting. because as Richard said, at the college, we already teach online classes. So when they had to shut everything down in March, it was very easy for most of us to convert our courses online. Whereas at the high school level, you're making things up from scratch. It was a real scramble. And I know that they've had the summer now to prepare for the fall, and that virtual learning will look a lot better this coming semester than it did at the end of the spring semester. But for me, it's just been really distressing to talk with my former colleagues about in-person instruction, because there's not a difference between the 19-year-olds that I teach and the 17-year-olds that high schoolers teach in terms of their ability to contract the virus and spread the virus. And the college is virtually 100% online, whereas the high school, anywhere from 40 to 60% of the students are going to be returning to the campus for in-person instruction. And so I just really empathize with, and I'm concerned for my colleagues at the secondary and the elementary level. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of people just want that empathy. They just want to be validated that it's correct for them to be concerned. And one of the problems with our political system is that too many elected officials, they're not validating the fact that educators should be concerned. All that educators are hearing are the reasons why it is safe, why they should stop complaining, why they should step up, and all of this other language. And it doesn't take into account the real complexity and nuance that everyone's having to confront.
I'll jump in and say, CyFair ISD is not or hasn't been ever a one-to-one district when it comes to technology. And I don't know that anyone was paying attention to that pre-COVID, but I do want to commend our CyFair ISD trustees that quickly, voted all in favor unanimously to get funding pulled together. I guess what I'm trying to say, I am hearing even just this week that we as a district, whether it be sort of the middleman, midline supervisors, it's like it's becoming a whispering now that we are doing even more preparation and anticipation of having to go all virtual. I keep telling everybody, I hope I'm wrong. I am not, and I told you so or gotcha kind of person by any means, especially when it comes to something like this that I truly feel like could be, life or death. But I was almost, I felt a little better after hearing some of that, my friends that are in different roles of CyFair ISD's administration level saying, we are fully aware that it may come a time, sooner than later before we need to have technology ready, already in the hands of every single CyFair ISD student so that we can be, like Bryan said, virtual.
So I'm curious, Nikki and Leslie and Mariah, we've had 3 weeks now of debate and drama and emotions high about the reopening. And here we are now on the verge of the reopening. It's happening. What is the mood of teachers right now? Mariah and Leslie, how are you personally feeling about next week? How are your colleagues feeling? What is the mood with our teachers?
I think one thing that every teacher can agree on is that we are really, really good at compartmentalizing. And just we know that when we're in front of kids, it's a show. We put on a brave face. We are consistency for them. We are nurturing, we're loving. Teachers are freaking out. And I don't even necessarily think that we have had time to process the risks of COVID this week because we're still learning how to do virtual learning. We're still learning how to take everything that we've been doing for the last several years and turning it into something quality for the students who are at home. So for example, I teach at a campus where almost 70% of my kids will be virtual, which is, that's a big relief for me thinking about, COVID, but also I I know several teachers this week who just had to practice Zoom for hours because they don't know how to use the technology. We've never been expected to, do Zoom while doing in person, and then making sure our lessons follow what we're doing in class, but then also making sure that somebody who didn't make it to Zoom can do that lesson on their own time. And so really creating education equity in our lessons is a challenge. And it's something that every teacher is thinking about when we talk about servicing our kids. So, we have teachers on our campus who've been teaching for years, who know pedagogy really well, who are struggling because they don't know how to use their dot cam. And so I think that's, we're at a point now that we don't even have the bandwidth to process all of the COVID scaries because we're trying to make it work and do right by our kids.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Mariah. And I would like to add that in my role, I get to interact with and support numerous teachers. And I am just stunned by how professional and solutions oriented and not surprised at how they're being problem solvers, and they're working so hard. I mean, they don't want to sacrifice any quality in their practice and in their students' education. And likewise, our administrators, who have in my building been kind, compassionate, flexible, have given grace, just the amount of thought and care and the number of hours that have gone into supporting staff, and that in turn, our teachers have put into preparing for students, is just inspiring. And I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about the stress levels, the anxiety that I am seeing among the teachers who I work with. I don't know that there's a single teacher that I can think of who's like, oh, this is fine. People are already putting in ridiculous hours because they are going to have to teach on two platforms simultaneously, right? Virtual and face-to-face. And on the back end, folks who aren't in education don't always appreciate all the little pieces that go into making effective face-to-face instruction happen, and all the paperwork and compliance, right? On top of like being a human and interacting in a compassionate and effective way with your students. And then you add the virtual and the technology, and now all the attendance requirements, and with the expectations are always challenging for educators in a sense of self-care and sustainability. And this year, I would say it's definitely worse. And a question in my mind that I would love to hear from district leaders is, how many hours per week you think it should take a CFISD teacher to meet these expectations and provide effective instruction for their students. I'd be really curious to know, like, what is reasonable, and there's not discussion around that. But I am concerned about folks burning out. And I mean, these are people who are just incredibly dedicated, wonderful professionals throughout the building. And it really breaks my heart to see already how folks are struggling with that anxiety and stress and that workload.
It's really astounding just hearing you guys describe what teaching is practically going to look like this year, just the logistics of it. They just sound so insane. And, teachers, many of them, they have a servant's heart, right? We don't do it for the money. And I feel like that gets taken advantage of sometimes, not like intentionally by administrators or anything, but just policymakers. When they tell teachers and schools to, do more with less, they know that teachers are going to, right? They're going to do what they have to do for kids. And I feel like that's never been more true than right now, where we're just assuming that teachers are just going to be superheroes and do whatever has to be done. And from a workers' rights standpoint, it's sort of appalling last session in the Texas legislature, our retired teachers, they don't have annual cost of living adjustments, but they were given a one-time 13th paycheck. And I feel like after this school year, which is going to be unlike anything ever in terms of the demands placed on teachers, I feel like the Texas legislature should grant every single K through 12 teacher an extra paycheck as well, as a bare minimum way of just thanking them for their work.
There's another aspect here that I know Nikki will appreciate, because as a union movement, we represent our teachers. And there's no greater stress on a teacher than an evaluation. And I'm talking about just in normal circumstances, where somebody comes into your classroom, sits for 15 minutes, and walks out and makes a judgment. This is going to be interesting. The evaluation of our members and what those evaluations are based on. And of course, what's most important, any kind of an evaluation of an employee, I don't care where you work, is what kind of resources are you providing that employee so they can succeed? Do they have everything they need to do the job that you ask them to do? And this will be another interesting aspect, is where does that principal really have an opinion, an educated opinion on what you ought to be doing better? I'm married. My wife, Ellen, we've been married for 33 years now, but she taught kindergarten for 39 years. And I cannot imagine her classroom as an online classroom. If you know anything about kindergartners and what they're doing in that classroom in their small little pods every day. So it's going to be interesting. But the evaluation aspect is going to layer another layer of stress on these teachers. And there's going to have to be some give and take there.
Well, and many elected officials have called for the suspension of accountability ratings for schools this year, and reducing the role that standardized tests may or may not play. And certainly teacher evaluations at the campus level is a variable there as well. I want to return real quick what we were just talking about a second ago, though, because I am, like Leslie, concerned about our teachers' mental well-being. Surely administrators and the district, everyone's aware that teachers are going to be under immense stress and anxiety. I'm curious to hear from any of you. Has anything been discussed? Have you been given any information from the district or your campus about mental health? Are they stepping up to proactively address the mental health concerns that are going to arise?
Mariah, I know you and I talked a couple of days ago about some PD that was offered around that. So before I ask you or Leslie to touch on that, I just want to add, first of all, Richard, I know your sweet Ellen personally, and I just have to say, there's a special place in heaven for all kindergartner teachers, especially your Helen. But no, Brian, before we talk about the mental health, I got to give a shout out to Rob D'Amico, who runs our tech for these things behind the scenes. He put in the chat of a Zoom a couple of weeks ago. He said, I'd love to pull some social media feeds, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, what have you, from some of these policymakers, how the tone has shifted, right? Around March and April. All teachers in the entire country were heroes. And, I mean, we could go back and look at just the rhetoric, everything that was posted on people turning on a dime and making sure kids graduated. And I mean, it was just, they were equal with, saving lives with healthcare workers. Fast forward to the tone, in social media land, if you will, come August, right? Just the quick 180. If you don't like it, get another job. I don't want to spend too much time. You guys have all seen just how toxic, when you're comparing a teacher to, I won't even go there. But my point, when Rob brought that up, he said we should go back and look at some of the tone and some of the messaging. Not saying for CyFair administrators, but definitely even some school administrators in other parts of the country, their overall tone in comparison, like I said. But before we even get to the evaluation or the mental health, we already at CyFair have teachers contacting us that they are not going to be able to have their legally, it is illegal, they're not going to be able to have their 30-minute duty-free lunch. When you talk about being on, and if nobody's ever taught, whether, I don't care if you taught week of vacation Bible school or Sunday school, if you've ever felt that pressure to be on, you know that a 30-minute duty-free lunch is a sacred to, collaborate, just to sit. Can I just say, for some educators, just to physically sit down and collaborate with your peers and talk, this student really seems to be struggling today. Did you have him in first period? Should we call home? Should we call mom? So we're already hearing some campuses are not going to have the 30-minute duty-free lunch. And also some campuses just in the last couple of days said again, it's legal to do this. They're supposed to have the 45-minute prep and planning period every day to make those phone calls home. I could do a whole, hour on everything that could happen during, but some campuses said, no, it's imperative that we do team planning. We need to come together with your administrator and go over this and that. And I'm like, but so you don't get a lunch, you don't get your prep and planning. Talk about being on. Some of these teachers get at the campus at 6:30 a.m. and I can't tell you how many of them call me from the parking lot at 6:30, 7:30, 8:30 p.m. So I can't even imagine, and I'll let, like I said, Leslie or Mariah talk about maybe some specific professional development that CyFair was able to offer around mental health. But before we even can talk about evaluation, the fact that people aren't getting a lunch break, that in and of itself, it's mind-boggling to me.
So
about that lunch break, that was all passed under Governor Mark White back in the mid to late 80s, and they've actually been after that 30-minute duty-free lunch and that 45-minute planning period ever since then, and always looking for an excuse to shave it off a little bit. It's scary.
To circle back to mental health, we did do a day
Mariah,
of Oh, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we did do a day of professional development dedicated to, mental health and what that looks like for teachers, what that looks like for students. And I know that there is, it's either free or discounted counseling services through the district. But I think it isn't a priority. It's more of a priority this year than it has been in previous years. But as we've mentioned a lot, teaching has always been hard. And it is significantly harder in the middle of a pandemic. Just because school is reopening doesn't mean the pandemic is over. And I think what I would love to see as an employee of the district is more emphasis on continued mental health practices in the school, both for children and for adults. We are literally in this together, and we have to be intentional about practicing mindfulness and showing students how to do that as well.
I agree. And I definitely think that offering, I believe it's 2 free counseling sessions to teachers is a good start. And frankly, if somebody's really suffering in a mental health, with a mental health condition and under additional stress, 2 counseling sessions may not be sufficient. I'm not sure with our new health insurance coverage, the extent to which mental health care is covered for people, and that can be a real expense at a time when families are stressed financially. And so that's something that I definitely am paying attention to. And I think too that the working conditions contribute to mental health issues. So it's one thing to acknowledge the importance of counseling and self-care and healthy boundaries and mindfulness. And I agree with Mariah that we need to bring those mindfulness and social emotional learning practices more to the forefront than ever in our schools, and always forevermore we should do that, not just right now. But I fear that until working conditions improve, some of that stuff is kind of a band-aid, because it's just unsustainable to work this way for a lot of folks.
So I wanted to touch briefly on virtual learning itself as a topic. Again, I have this unique perspective of being at the college level, but most of my career being at the high school. And it is correct that in the K through 12 system, there are valid concerns about equity and distance learning, virtual learning, how it's going to impact different student groups. And yet at the college level, we don't really have that discussion as much unless it's just around access to technology. And the Lone Star College system has done a good job, just like CyFair ISD, in providing technology to students who need it. So at the college level, you have a bunch of students who are not going to go off to a 4-year school, and they're going to do a 2-year community college course load instead, and they see it as a great thing, right? This is convenient. My online classes will be cheaper. Yet at the high school level, there's a concern that students are going to fall behind. What kind of concerns do you still have as high school educators about those disparities in how this will impact students? Are we ready for virtual learning? Is it going to be a good rollout, do you think?
So I think one thing that people often forget is that a lot of our students, this is the first computer they've ever had. So they don't know how to use Google Docs. They don't know how to use Google Slides. And so it takes them significantly longer to turn in an assignment that you and I could do in like a few minutes, because we've been using this technology for years, where our students, we have to teach them, this is what a text box is. This is how you capitalize words. It's like reteaching them how to write and how to do different things. I think when we talk about equity specifically, one, we have to consider the students who haven't had access to technology before. But then, I've heard different campuses are enforcing like a camera on system. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't know what the home environment of our students are, especially our students who are economically disadvantaged, who are taking care of their siblings at home. That is a really hard policy to enforce equitably when we haven't really even touched on, checking our biases and, all of the social justice things in this PD that we've been doing for the last 3 weeks. Like, no one has talked to teachers, at least from what I've seen, and from the district, no one has talked to teachers about how we equitably treat students on Zoom. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that, where students are over disciplined for how they behave on Zoom. Well, no one has taught a child how to have a Zoom classroom. You know what I mean? We in person school, we teach them how to behave in the classroom. We teach them how to come in. We teach them how to write their name, how to turn in things. And, we haven't really put an emphasis on training them for Zoom while we're also training our students who are there in person. So I see that being one of the biggest hurdles in reaching equitable access to quality education in the fall.
That's really interesting to hear that, obviously we're concerned about the instructional component and the delivery of the content. It sounds like there's going to be a real gap, perhaps, in some of that, like you said, social, emotional, social justice aspects of education, and knowing your audience and knowing how to maintain an inclusive and affirming and empowering learning environment.
Can I just add, again, my son had virtual Meet the Teacher, and then when they ran through day 2, they ran through a mock. It was only the virtual learners that were going to be on there, but there was one student that I could tell was very, very concerned if he was being seen or not. And I just need to share that when all of this happened back in March, I was contacted by one of our paraprofessionals She had gone through a horrible divorce. She had moved back in with her own parents because, for financial reasons, just basically starting her life back over. And she was very emotional and telling me, she's like, I don't want to have to be forced to Zoom with my colleagues and my principal because I have all of my, belongings piled up into my old bedroom and it looks a hot mess in here. I mean, so, yes, I wear the parent hat, and I could tell like my heart was breaking for this little boy that kept asking all these questions. And the student was like, how do I turn my camera off but still engage? But I was like, you know what? That again, we're talking about mental wellness. We have adults going through the same thing right now.
Great point. So our last question, right now, during the pandemic, after the pandemic, what do you feel that state representatives, that elected officials can do to support our public school system, be it the K through 12 system or the higher education system? Richard, why don't we start with you?
Well, part of that answer is what they should have been doing all along in terms of proper funding, proper equipment for our schools. This kind of underscores what we don't have. There was some talk years ago of having kind of a publicly funded internet system, that would operate off the telephone pole in your backyard, and that went away real quick. And so there's that. There's what we don't have in our schools. There's a lot to catch up on, but we're going to have to look at. I think we're going to end up with a lot more flexibility in terms of how we deliver education after this, and that's probably what we're going to end up with in the bottom line. But we're going to have a state that's going to support public education and support our staff and our teachers, just like before, and they're going to have to double down on it. I recently read where our governor said the teachers, they just need to do their job. Well, state legislature finally needs to do its job.
Richard, you took the words out of my mouth, and I just want to add, and Bryan, we need more people like you that have walked the walk, talked the talk. I'm just excited to even engage tonight to say, wow, we have one of our own, an educator that's put his hat in the ring and is running for office. We need lots more, whether it be current or former educators that are engaged in our political arenas.
I think for me, one, teacher pay is always going to be something that I will advocate for, especially in this year. Like, teachers are woefully underpaid in comparison to other professions. The amount of work that we do, it's just not comparable or equitable compensation. But really, I feel like specifically in our district, our elected official is out of touch. How long has he spent in a public school in our district? When was the last time he spent a whole day seeing the lives of teachers and the lives of students? Because, he can say all the crazy things on social media, but he doesn't necessarily really understand the plight of teachers right now. And so I want a legislator who is empathetic, who is going to pop into classrooms, pop into schools, who really is more boots on the ground, because we need somebody who's going to actually advocate on behalf of teachers and advocate with teachers in mind.
I've had the opportunity to talk on the phone at length with our current representative for Texas 130, and also with Bryan. And there's just a really stark difference in their understanding of the issues and in the empathy towards teachers and students, especially our students in marginalized communities. And so I think just having that lens probably naturally leads to advocacy that makes more sense and is better for our public schools. Our current representative talked to me about, well, maybe we should have state testing every 6 weeks or every grading period, right? And I think actually we need to rely less on that testing. I support teachers in EOC tested courses, and the way that the STAR test dominates the curriculum because of the necessity of getting kids over that passing line is really a travesty, because it takes away from a true education. And so I'd love to see us move away from over testing and over relying on that data as an indicator of a good education. And I agree with the panel on funding. I mean, we need to be adequately funded so that our schools have the resources they need, our teachers have the benefits and the pay that they deserve, properly funded pension. I mean, I have a laundry list, there's just a lot that we need to tighten up in Texas when it comes to how we care for our public schools and our students.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as a parent and as a teacher myself, when I started this campaign, public education was near and dear to my heart. And I had no idea when I started this race how important public education would become, both in terms of trying to reopen schools in the context of a pandemic, but the funding fight that is coming in the next session. State and local governments, they haven't even really begun to experience the economic and fiscal fallout from this national recession. And it's going to be tough next session. I started my teaching career in 2010, 2011, the year that they cut $5 billion from our schools. And we still haven't restored that funding. And I, as a first-year teacher, I was laid off with all of the first-year teachers district-wide due to those budget cuts. So I know firsthand what could be coming a year from now, depending on what happens next spring in Austin. And I really hope that the parents in this district think long and hard about who they want in the ring throwing punches for their schools. Do they want somebody who's lukewarm on public education, who does the bare minimum for public education because they're not personally or professionally invested in the public schools? Or do they want somebody who lives and breathes public education, who is a product of public schools, who teaches in public schools, whose children will go to public schools? Because that's who I am. And so I'm concerned about, our schools moving forward, because very difficult fiscal decisions are going to be made. And I kind of made up that policy earlier about giving teachers a 13th paycheck, but it sounds good to me. I think that's something that we should try to do, even though that's going to be difficult in the next session. There's a lot to be done. We have to remember that education funding is a continuous investment. It's not good enough to just increase funding one session. You have to sustain those increases to account for your population growth. We are one of the fastest growing states in the country, and we're still funding our schools at levels from like 10 years ago. And what's not said enough, this will be my last point, education funding is about 3 different generations of people. Number one, it's about children in the classroom. They need the resources to be prepared for democracy and prepared for the workforce. Number two, we're investing in our education professionals. They need good wages to support their families. They contribute to the local economy. When you cut education funding and you cut jobs, you harm your local economies. Point 3, we are investing in our retired educators, those who are living currently on a fixed income. Their pensions have no increases on an annual basis. So we have to, across the board, children, adults, retired educators, we have to support everybody in this endeavor. The strength of our public schools is the strength of our republic. And so that's where my heart is on this matter. I know y'all feel the same way. Thank you very much for participating in this discussion. It was very informative, and I'm going to be thinking about you as school starts on Tuesday. I don't know what the answers are to these problems, but you're going to be in my thoughts and my prayers for sure. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan.
All right.